and the poet, it's still a work in progress. He still suffers from an extreme case of shyness, which is even more acute in the presence of the opposite sex.
But little by little, he overcomes his shyness and becomes one of the most active members of his high school. He's chosen as the president of the Ateneo Literario, a poetry society of his class, and also has the honorable title of being correspondent and sales agent for the magazine La Claridad, which is published by the Student Federation of Chile. He also becomes very involved in poetry competitions. In 1919, he wins first prize for the city of Temuco in Los Juegos Florales, a national poetry competition held throughout Chile. He also publishes his poems in the Temuco newspaper La Mañana, which is owned by his uncle.
This young man, definitely bitten by the literary bug, will soon feel that Temuco is not enough, that he needs to go out into the vast, open world. In 1921, he will board the night train that will take him to the big capital of Santiago to study French, with a scholarship he received thanks to his good grades and persistence. That train will initiate the poet on his first of many journeys. As the train progressed into the night, he knew he was leaving behind his childhood, his beloved woods, and the harsh father with tranquil eyes. In other words, he was leaving his world, his roots, and his lost earth mother buried among the grapevines.
In the beginning, Santiago is for the young poet a cluster of boxy buildings where people enclose themselves day and night. Neruda moves into a boarding house at 513 Maruri Street. He recalls that that number became seared into his mind for fear he would lose his way in the big city. But little by little, the city opens up and he sets out to discover it. He befriends intellectuals and bohemians from all walks of life who initiate him in the world of late nights in taverns and bars all across town. These friends and this period in Neruda's life are recalled in a poem titled Travel Companions from his book Memorial de Isla Negra.
Then I arrived in the capital, vaguely impregnated with the mist and rain. What streets were those? The clothing of 1921 pullulated in an atrocious smell of gas, coffee, and bricks. I circulated among the students, bewildered, concentrating the walls within me, seeking every evening in my poor poetry the branches, the raindrops, and moon that had become lost. I went with them. In their chorus alone, my voice recognized the wilds where it was born. I entered manhood, singing amid the flames, embraced by companions of nocturnal condition, who sang with me in the dives and gave me more than one tenderness, more than one springtime defended by their hostile hands.
Around this time, Neruda started wearing a great black cape. He transformed this railroad cape into a regular feature of the poet's wardrobe, along with a black brim hat, which he made famous in his walks around the city. He was truly the image of the pale, romantic writer.
He also wrote feverishly 5 to 7 poems a day, which would appear in print in 1923 in Neruda's first book of poems, titled Crepusculario, or the Book of Twilight.
The poems were inspired by those afternoons full of romantic longing and desolation as Neruda watched the dramatic sunsets from his boarding house window. To publish it, since this was a self-published enterprise, Neruda had to sell his scarce belongings, including a watch his father had given him a few years before he left to Santiago. The sacrifice of the watch is symbolic in more ways than one if one bears in mind his father's resistance towards Neruda becoming a poet. Now, in the same way that Neruda had transformed his father's railroad cape into a cape for poetry, he now converted his father's watch into books of poetry.
Moreover, Crepusculario is a book heavily influenced by Modernismo, a Spanish-American literary movement founded by the Nicaraguan poet Rubén Darío. Ironically, when Neruda publishes his first book, the Modernista movement has already begun its sharp decline. But if these poems embodied the death rattle of a movement, they also exhibited the characteristics of a personal Neruda, a Neruda who would soon discover his own inflection and his individual style.
In fact, no